It is midnight. You are standing at the absolute edge of a dark, rough-cut stone tunnel. The air around you feels different here. It's heavy, uncomfortably cold, and thick with this dampness that just clings to your skin.
Right.
You reach into your coat pocket, your fingers are trembling, maybe just a fraction, as you pull out a single fragile wooden match. You drag the sulfur head against the rough, freezing limestone wall.
And it flares to life.
Exactly. It casts this weak, flickering orange glow that barely pushes back the pitch-black darkness swallowing the 125-foot cavern stretching out right in front of you. You hold your breath. The silence is absolute. It's almost suffocating. And then you wait.
Just waiting in the dark.
Yeah. From deep within the utter blackness, a terrifying, blood-curdling scream echoes down the tunnel. It bounces off the damp stone walls, distorting, amplifying, rushing directly toward you. And before your brain can even process the sound, an unseen, icy force violently blows out your flame.
Wow.
You are plunged back into total, inescapable darkness.
See, that scenario strips away every single modern comfort we have. You lose your sight. You are holding onto a light source so fragile a breath could extinguish it, and, well, you are confronted with the absolute certainty that you are not alone in the dark.
It's terrifying.
It is.
Yeah.
Evolutionarily, we are hardwired to panic in that exact situation. It triggers the oldest, most primitive survival mechanisms in the human brain.
But the wild thing is, that exact scenario isn't just some thought experiment. It is a highly specific, real-world ritual that thousands of people have actively sought out. They are intentionally putting themselves in that exact psychological state.
Right.
So welcome to today's deep dive. We are traveling to the northwest corner of Niagara Falls, Ontario, Canada, to this unassuming stretch of road known as Warner Road.
Yeah, Warner Road.
We are looking at a vast stack of sources for this one. I'm talking historical archives, geological surveys, folklore databases, and even acoustic studies. And they are all centered around a single location, famously known as the Screaming Tunnel.
Our focus today is to really pull this apart layer by layer. We need to disentangle the terrifying, deeply entrenched folklore of this local legend from its surprisingly mundane historical reality.
The actual physical reality.
Right, because when you strip away the myth and just look at the bare limestone, the Screaming Tunnel becomes this incredible case study. It shows us how simple abandoned infrastructure becomes basically a blank canvas for our deepest human fears.
When I first looked at these sources, my immediate thought was just about the sheer physical presence of the place. We are talking about raw civil engineering here. Bricks, mortar, dirt, and tons of limestone.
Yeah, heavy industry.
To understand how a piece of Canadian railway infrastructure transforms into a portal of absolute terror, we have to understand what it actually is in the physical world. I tried to map out the dimensions provided in the geological surveys. It's 16 feet high and 125 feet long.
That is massive.
It is. If you stand inside it, it's basically cavernous. It's significantly taller than a standard semi-truck. The scale of it feels almost, oppressive.
Well, the scale is massive because
Yeah.
the ambition behind it was massive. This wasn't just carved out for a quiet country road. This tunnel was constructed from rough-cut limestone back in the 19th century. Some surveys put the final touches in the very early 1900s.
Okay.
It was designed specifically for a planned north-to-south line of the Grand Trunk Railway, which was later absorbed into the Canadian National Railway system. The engineers had to cut this massive cavern directly through the earth and stone to accommodate huge, incredibly heavy, steam-bellowing locomotives.
Wow.
But here's the historical anomaly that sets the stage for everything else. That specific railway line never actually materialized.
I read that in the sources and I just couldn't quite process the economics of it. You have 19th century labor, men swinging sledgehammers, using hand-driven star drills, packing black powder into limestone to blast this hole foot by foot.
Extremely dangerous work, too.
Yeah, it would have taken an immense physical toll, massive financial investment, and then what, they just walked away? Not a single train ever passed through it?
Not one. The Grand Trunk Railway was notorious for its aggressive, often completely reckless expansion. They were trying to lay track everywhere, competing fiercely for dominance in North America.
Just a massive land grab.
Exactly. In many cases, they started projects before the funding or the route approvals were even fully secured. The Screaming Tunnel is essentially a monument to that specific kind of corporate hubris. The line was abandoned, the money dried up or diverted elsewhere, and the tunnel was just left empty.
That's crazy.
But nature and agriculture do not allow a perfectly good 16-foot-high stone tube to go to waste.
Right. The sources detailed this really incredible pivot. It goes from being the bleeding edge of industrial transportation to essentially becoming like a very large puddle manager for local farmers.
Yeah, it became a vital piece of agricultural drainage. The Niagara region is really prone to heavy water accumulation, and this tunnel was perfectly positioned to move water from the upper farmlands down to the valley below. It prevented massive flooding.
Okay, so it had a real practical use.
Oh, absolutely. But the farmers realized they had more than just a drain. Throughout the 20th century, they actually used this massive 16-foot clearance to safely transport their goods and herd their livestock. We're talking sheep, cattle, whatever needed moving. They take them right underneath the actual operating railroad tracks that were eventually built up above.
And today, I mean, it's largely a pass-through for hikers on the Bruce Trail.
Right.
We are effectively talking about a multi-million-dollar 19th century highway overpass that was abandoned and turned into an exclusive crosswalk for sheep and runoff water.
That's absurd when you put it like that.
There is a deep, eerie absurdity to it. And I think that abandonment is the crucial ingredient here. A space that massive, built for roaring steam engines, but left to just drip water in the dark. It feels profoundly liminal.
Liminality is the core concept here. It's essential to understanding why this tunnel attracts legends. Liminal spaces are those in-between areas. Corridors, stairwells, empty parking lots at 3 a.m.
Places you're supposed to pass through, not hang out in.
Exactly. They are transitional by nature. An abandoned tunnel is the ultimate liminal space. Our brains are incredibly uncomfortable with spaces that are devoid of their intended purpose.
Like it's holding its breath.
Yes. When you walk into a massive, echoing stone cavern that was built for noise and industry, but all you hear is silence and dripping water, it creates this intense cognitive dissonance. The void is unsettling. So the human imagination basically intervenes to fill that void. We project narratives into the dark to make sense of the emptiness.
And the narrative that the local community projected into this specific void is just undeniably horrific. The lore has been circulating for roughly 100 years now. At the center of it is the ghost of a young girl who died right there in the darkness of the tunnel. But what struck me immediately in the folklore archives is that there isn't just one story. We are dealing with two very distinct variations of how this girl died, and they feel psychologically very different.
Folklore is not a static text. It is a living, evolving organism. It mutates based on the anxieties of the people telling the story. In our sources, we see these two divergent paths. They share the same setting and the same horrific mechanism of death, which is fire, but the context changes everything.
Let's look at version A. I would call this the accidental tragedy. In this variation of the lore, the young girl is playing or perhaps working near a fire, and her clothing catches light. She is terrified, she's in excruciating pain, and she runs blindly.
Right.
She runs into the tunnel, desperately trying to use it as a shortcut to find the nearest farmhouse for help. But the tunnel is 125 feet long, her injuries are too severe, and she succumbs to the flames, dying completely alone in the passage.
That version is a straightforward cautionary tale.
Yeah.
It is horrific, sure, but it operates on the logic of bad luck and tragic accidents. It's the kind of story a community might tell to warn children about the dangers of fire or wandering off alone in the dark.
Right, keep away from the tunnel.
Exactly. But then you analyze version B, and the narrative fundamentally shifts. It goes from a terrible accident to an act of profound, calculated human evil.
Version B is incredibly dark. In this telling, the young girl isn't the victim of a random spark. She is actively running away from a nearby farmhouse, fleeing an abusive alcoholic father. She runs into the pitch-black tunnel to hide from him.
And he follows her.
Yes. He tracks her down. He finds her cowering in the dark, douses her in gasoline, and intentionally burns her alive.
Before we even dig into the psychology of why these two stories exist, we absolutely must establish the historical baseline. According to extensive archival research, there are 0 verified historical records to support either of these events.
None at all. None.
There are no death certificates, no coroner reports, no local newspaper clippings from the 1920s or 30s, and there are 0 police records documenting a child burning to death in or near that tunnel. The entire narrative is a total fabrication.
So we literally just have a massive, empty limestone tunnel and a completely fabricated, century-old story about a burning child. But look at the contrast between version A and version B. One is sad and scary, but the father with the gasoline, that introduces malice.
It does.
It introduces premeditated murder by a primary caregiver. It's a story of ultimate betrayal.
If you track the evolution of urban legends, a clear pattern emerges. As stories are passed down through generations, they basically optimize for maximum emotional impact. They become more violent, more malicious, and importantly, more specific.
What do you mean by more specific?
Well, the addition of gasoline in version B is a massive tell. Gasoline is an industrial detail. It heightens the terror because it implies a deliberate, calculated act of destruction. It's not a dropped lantern or a stray spark from a fireplace anymore. It's a weapon.
We are effectively treating this tunnel as a quarantine zone for our worst societal fears. We take the terror of domestic abuse, the vulnerability of children, we box it all up in a story, and we just leave it in the limestone.
That's a great way to put it.
But why does version B become the dominant narrative? Why do we, as a society, constantly gravitate toward the story with the most profound evil when there are no police records to back up either of them?
Because a tragic accident is scary, but it's random. It doesn't offer us a villain. It just tells us that the world is chaotic and unfair. An abusive father, however, touches on a very deep, primal human fear about trust, safety, and the hidden darkness within the family unit.
The place you're supposed to be safest.
Right. By projecting that specific complex fear onto a physical location, like a dark, abandoned tunnel, we externalize it. We give the fear a geographic coordinate. We can point to the tunnel and say, the evil is in there. It allows us to manage our anxiety by containing it.
Containing it in the limestone. And because we've given it a physical location, people can visit it, they can interact with it. The legend transitions from just a scary story told at sleepovers into a set of highly specific instructions.
It becomes a ritual, and rituals require active participation.
The midnight ritual. This is what brings thousands of people out to Warner Road in the dead of night. The lore dictates that you must enter the tunnel at exactly midnight. You cannot use a flashlight. You must light a wooden match.
Very specific.
Very. If you follow these instructions perfectly, the folklore promises that the girl's terrified spirit will manifest, her screams will physically echo around you, and she will blow out the match.
We have to deconstruct the mechanics of this ritual because, from a psychological and scientific standpoint, it's an absolute masterclass in sensory manipulation. Let's just start with the requirement of the wooden match. Why a wooden match?
Right, because if I'm actively seeking out a supernatural entity in a pitch-black cavern, I am bringing a high-powered military-grade LED flashlight. I'm lighting the whole place up.
Exactly. But the ritual explicitly forbids that. It demands the weakest, most unreliable light source imaginable. A wooden match emits a very low lumen output.
More importantly, the light is not stable.
It flickers. It flickers constantly in response to microcurrents of air and the burning of the wood grain itself. When you hold a flickering light source inside a tunnel with rough-cut limestone walls, it creates dancing, erratic shadows. Every jagged edge of the stone, every little crevice suddenly appears to move.
And you are standing in a 125-foot stone tube. It was literally designed to funnel drainage water, which means it also acts as a venturi tube for the wind. It funnels air currents from the valley below, compressing them and accelerating them right through the narrow passage.
Exactly. The physics of the space dictate that there will almost always be a draft. You are taking a fragile, wind-susceptible flame into a damp, drafty, highly pressurized stone corridor.
It is a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It really is. The laws of thermodynamics practically guarantee the match is going to blow out. But because you are standing there at midnight, primed by a horrific story of murder, when that sudden gust of cold wind extinguishes your only light, your brain does not logically process fluid dynamics and air pressure.
No, your brain immediately concludes, ghost. The environment is doing all the heavy lifting for the legend, but the sensory manipulation goes beyond just the visual deprivation and the wind. The sources highlight that visitors frequently report a very specific, intense smell during this ritual, a sharp, stinky odor, specifically the smell of sulfur.
The intersection of folklore and geology here is just phenomenal. In Western cultural history, theology, and demonology, sulfur or brimstone is inextricably linked to the supernatural.
Descent of the underworld.
Yes.
Ah.
It is the presence of demonic forces or restless, violent spirits. So you walk into this pitch-black tunnel, your adrenaline is spiking, your match blows out, and suddenly your olfactory system is hit with the smell of sulfur. For someone who wants to believe, that is empirical, undeniable proof that the legend is real.
I looked into the geology of this because I needed to know why a random tunnel in Ontario smells like the underworld. The scientific reality is entirely grounded in chemistry, isn't it?
It is entirely chemical. The Niagara Escarpment is primarily composed of ancient sedimentary rock, which is heavily rich in limestone. Limestone is naturally porous. As groundwater seeps through the earth and the stone, it dissolves natural minerals.
Okay.
Now, combine that mineral-rich water with the tunnel's actual purpose, which is agricultural drainage. For decades, this tunnel managed stagnant water, decaying organic matter like leaves, and agricultural runoff. In those stagnant low-oxygen pools, anaerobic bacteria basically feast on the organic material.
And the byproduct?
The byproduct of that specific bacterial digestion is hydrogen sulfide gas.
Hydrogen sulfide. The exact chemical compound responsible for the smell of rotten eggs, and ironically, the exact smell historical texts associate with demons.
Precisely. It is a slow, continuous geological and biological reaction happening right beneath the visitor's feet. It has absolutely nothing to do with a haunting and everything to do with the fact that they're standing in a century-old, unventilated drainage ditch.
Just imagine the sheer sensory overload for a person standing in the middle of that tunnel at midnight. Their nervous system is being bombarded with perfectly natural phenomena that happen to perfectly mimic the climax of a horror movie.
It's the perfect storm.
You are freezing. You are plunged into sudden, unexpected darkness because of a draft. You smell sulfur. And then there's the auditory component. The ritual promises a scream.
This is where we see the phenomenon of pareidolia at work. Pareidolia is our brain's evolutionary tendency to find meaningful patterns in random, ambiguous stimuli.
Like seeing faces in the clouds.
Yes, but also auditory. Evolutionarily speaking, if our early ancestors heard a rustling in the bushes and their brains interpreted it as a predator, they ran away and survived. If they interpreted it as just the wind and it actually was a predator, they died.
So we are descended from the hypervigilant pattern seekers.
Exactly. We are wired to over-detect human voices and faces, especially in high-stress, low-visibility environments.
And a 125-foot limestone tube is going to act as a massive acoustic amplifier.
It is a giant echo chamber. Sounds from the outside environment enter the tunnel and become violently distorted. Think about the sound of distant highway traffic on the QEW, or the wind rushing aggressively through the dense trees on the Bruce Trail.
Or wildlife.
Yes, nocturnal wildlife. A fox's cry, for instance, already sounds remarkably like a woman screaming. When that sound wave enters the stone cylinder, it bounces, it stretches, the frequencies distort. If your brain is perfectly primed, soaked in adrenaline, waiting for the scream of a burning girl, it will translate the sound of a distant truck's air brakes into human agony.
It's confirmation bias weaponized by acoustics. If you go looking for a ghost with a match in a wet, drafty, highly reverberant tunnel, the laws of physics and your own evolutionary biology guarantee you are going to get haunted. You are essentially hacking your own nervous system.
It is a culturally sanctioned adrenaline rush, facilitated by a masterclass in environmental psychology. But what makes the Screaming Tunnel unique isn't just that it works on local teenagers. It's that this localized biological hack caught the attention of people whose literal profession is terrifying audiences on a global scale.
Which shifts the narrative completely from local folklore to international pop culture. In 1983, the Screaming Tunnel got a massive, highly public validation. The tunnel's inherent, overwhelming creepiness made it a primary filming location for David Cronenberg's film adaptation of Stephen King's horror novel, The Dead Zone.
This represents a massive paradigm shift in the life cycle of any urban legend. You have a collision between grassroots, oral folklore, and top-tier Hollywood production.
Two titans of horror.
Right. David Cronenberg is a legendary director known for his visceral, deeply unsettling psychological horror. Stephen King is the undisputed architect of modern horror literature. When location scouts for a production of that pedigree choose your local drainage ditch as a set piece, it permanently, irreversibly cements the location's status as a terrifying landmark.
It fundamentally changes the public perception. If it's scary enough to serve as the backdrop for Christopher Walken in a Stephen King adaptation directed by David Cronenberg, the public accepts that it is definitively, objectively scary. It validates the fear.
Completely validates it.
But the sources reveal something else about the geography of this area that I found fascinating. The Screaming Tunnel is not an isolated anomaly. It is located in extremely close proximity to another famous, allegedly haunted location known as the Blue Ghost Tunnel.
The proximity is key. It introduces the concept of the geography of hauntings. We have to ask why there are multiple haunted railway tunnels clustered together in this specific vicinity, the Niagara region. What is it about this particular infrastructure landscape that generates so much localized ghost lore?
Is it simply because there are a lot of old tunnels, or is there something specific about the history of the Niagara region's development?
It's definitely the history. The Niagara region in the 19th and early 20th centuries was a massive, brutal hub of industrial and railway expansion. It was the absolute frontier of engineering. They were trying to move people and immense amounts of cargo around one of the world's largest natural obstacles.
Niagara Falls and the escarpment.
Exactly. This required a huge influx of transient workers. The labor conditions were incredibly dangerous. Men were working with volatile black powder, massive earth-moving equipment, and zero modern safety standards. Tunnels were cut, massive canals were dug, lines were laid. And as economics shifted and companies like the Grand Trunk went bankrupt, many of these projects were abruptly abandoned.
So the entire landscape is essentially scarred with the massive decaying corpses of industrial ambition.
That's a very vivid way to put it, but yes. You have a region littered with liminal, dark, subterranean spaces. And because there's a cluster of them, the folklore begins to compound. The legends cross-pollinate.
Like a contagion.
Right. If the Screaming Tunnel has a horrific backstory, it makes complete intuitive sense to a local storyteller that the Blue Ghost Tunnel right down the road must be haunted too. The real-world trauma of dangerous industrial labor slowly mutates into a regional identity built on dark mythology.
And then Hollywood arrives and acts as an incredible feedback loop. The movie The Dead Zone uses the location because it inherently looks incredibly creepy. But then, because the location was featured in a famous horror movie, it becomes infinitely more famous and haunted in the public eye.
It draws a crowd.
People who watch the movie go seek out the real tunnel, bringing their Hollywood-enhanced expectations with them.
It blurs the line between fiction and reality entirely. The folklore created the eerie atmosphere that attracted the film scouts, and the film amplified the folklore that sustains the legend to this day. It is a perfectly closed circuit of cultural reinforcement.
Looking at all these sources, the complete lack of historical records confirming any death, the brutal economics of the Grand Trunk Railway, the hydrogen sulfide chemistry, the acoustics, and the Stephen King connection, it makes me think the Screaming Tunnel might legitimately be the most successful piece of accidental horror marketing in Canadian history.
Accidental marketing is the perfect way to frame it. No one sat down in a municipal boardroom and engineered a plan to turn a failed railway drain into a supernatural tourist destination.
Definitely no.
It happened organically.
Oh.
It was driven entirely by our inherent human need to mythologize the dark, forgotten corners of our built environment.
If there is one thing to take away from all these sources today, it is the profound duality of this space. On paper, in the cold, hard light of day, the Screaming Tunnel is merely a 19th century agricultural drainage ditch. It is an engineering footnote.
A puddle manager.
Right. It was built with star drills and black powder for trains that never arrived, and it was used by farmers to move sheep and manage runoff water.
But in the human imagination, which operates entirely outside the cold, hard light of day, it is a sulfur-smelling, scream-filled tomb. It is the site of an unspeakable, tragic betrayal. It is a set piece for the masters of cinematic horror. The physical limestone is nothing more than a projector screen. The human mind is the film.
It is a stunning reminder of the absolute reality-bending power of storytelling. The next time you walk through an abandoned piece of infrastructure, an old stretch of train tracks, a quiet, overgrown hiking trail, a forgotten highway overpass, take a moment to consider how incredibly easily cold, hard facts are completely overwritten by a good, terrifying story. We are meaning-making machines, and sometimes the meaning we most want to make is fear.
We have a deep psychological desire to be frightened, but on our own terms, in a space we can ultimately walk away from. The Screaming Tunnel provides that exact controlled service.
Which leaves us with one final, lingering question to ponder. We've established definitively that the story of the Burning Girl is almost certainly a complete fabrication. There is zero historical record. But imagine standing there in the dark.
With that flickering match.
Exactly. If a completely fabricated story about a haunting can physically change how we experience a real place, if it can actually trick our brains into smelling geological sulfur as something demonic, if it can force our auditory cortex to interpret the wind as the agonized screams of a dying child, are the ghosts we create in our own minds actually more powerful than any real historical record?
Well, if the mind makes the terror real in the exact moment the match blows out, the lack of historical evidence suddenly doesn't matter much at all.
Something to think about the next time you find yourself standing alone in the dark. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the legends around you, keep looking for the truth hidden in the shadows, and remember, sometimes the absolute scariest thing in the dark is just your own imagination. Until next time.